She just wanted to escape an awkward moment. But when she asked, "Could you be my boyfriend?" she never imagined that the man before her, the millionaire CEO, would say yes, changing her destiny forever. Watch this story until the end. You'll be surprised by this tale. If you enjoy love stories and romance, subscribe to this channel, leave a comment. Every day we post videos like this. Continuing, she was just one more, among dozens, a face lost in the crowd of employees at Alistair & Sons Construction, the largest real estate conglomerate in London. Antonia Farrell, 28, an administrative assistant on the 18th floor. Always punctual, always discreet, always efficient, and invisible to almost everyone in that glass and steel skyscraper that cut through the grey sky above Canary Wharf. Invisible to everyone except him. Henry Alistair, 36, heir to the empire, a ruthless CEO known in business circles as the executioner, not by chance. He was known for his calculated coldness, for firing without a second thought, and for never, ever, forming bonds within the company. Executives came and went. Secretaries rarely lasted more than 6 months. Assistants trembled when he approached. But Antonia, for some reason he didn't understand himself, remained. 3 years in the same position, silent and competent. Perhaps it was the absolute discretion with which she moved through the corridors. Perhaps it was the way she anticipated his needs even before he verbalized them. Or perhaps it was the way she, unlike others, didn't avert her gaze when he stared at her. She merely held his gaze for the exact amount of time, neither submissive nor defiant, and then returned to work. On that Monday morning, London was buzzing under an unusually warm May heat. The central air conditioning was malfunctioning, making the atmosphere even more tense than usual. Antonia arrived at 7:30 a.m., as always, but something was different. Her new shoe's heel pinched her right foot, causing a searing pain with every step. Her curly hair, usually tamed in an impeccable bun, seemed to have a life of its own in that humidity. And to top it off, the only clean blouse she could find in her wardrobe had a stubborn crease that the iron couldn't eliminate. "Good morning, Mr. Alistair," she said, placing his coffee on the solid mahogany desk. Henry looked up from the documents he was analyzing. For an instant, just an instant, his gaze swept over her face, noting discreet dark circles that weren't usually there. "Good morning," he replied dryly, returning to his papers. Antonia turned to leave when she heard the sound of the cup being set down forcefully on the table. "What is this?" His voice sounded dangerously calm. She turned back, confused. "Your coffee, sir." "It's sweet." Antonia's stomach plummeted. How could she have made such a basic mistake? In 3 years, she had never sweetened his coffee. She knew exactly how he liked it. Pure, strong, no sugar, no milk, coffee as bitter as its owner. "I apologize, sir. It was a lapse. I'll get another one immediately." He stared at her, his blue eyes cold as ice. "I prefer everything bitter, Miss Farrell, including my day." He turned his back, ending the conversation. It was the kind of cutting remark he used to keep everyone at a distance. The kind of remark that made experienced executives tremble. In Antonia, however, it caused only a slight tremor, a minuscule crack in her professional armor. Still, she smiled. On the outside. Inside, something burned. At lunchtime, while the other assistants went down to the food court, Antonia remained at her desk. The heel was killing her, and she took advantage of the momentary solitude to take off her shoes under the desk and massage her aching feet. That's when she heard his footsteps approaching. Footsteps she would recognize among hundreds. She quickly tried to put her shoes back on, but it was too late. "Still here, Ms. Farrell?" he asked, stopping in front of her desk. "I'm getting ahead on some reports, monsieur," she replied, feeling her face burn with embarrassment as she realized he had noticed her bare feet. Henry observed her for a few moments, as if analyzing a particularly complex enigma. "Don't you eat lunch?" The question caught her by surprise. In 3 years, it was the first time he had shown any interest in her routine. "I usually bring a packed lunch," she replied, vaguely gesturing towards the small refrigerator in the corner of the office. He nodded slightly. "The Raymond report. I need it by the end of the day." "It's practically finished, sir." "Excellent." He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. "And Mrs. Farrell?" "Yes?" Uncomfortable shoes are a terrible investment. And he left, leaving Antonia paralyzed, her heart beating inexplicably fast. In the weeks that followed, something subtle began to change. It was nothing that could be named or pointed out directly. There were glances that lasted a second longer than necessary. There were fingers that accidentally touched when documents were passed from one to the other. It was the way he started to linger in the assistance area, when before he would just give quick orders and leave. Antonia began to notice how he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. Similarly, she found herself studying his profile while he took calls. The way the vein in his neck pulsed when he was irritated, how his jaw clenched before making difficult decisions. The deep timbre of his voice when he spoke on the phone late at night, thinking the floor was empty. Henry, in turn, became increasingly aware of her presence, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating on something complex, how she smiled discreetly upon completing a difficult task, the sound of her low laugh when taking personal calls, a sound he had never noticed before. He began to notice her as he had never noticed any employee, and this infuriated him, because he felt he was giving in, and giving in meant losing control. Losing control was not an option for Henry Allister. On a Friday afternoon, when most of the team had already left for the weekend, Antonia remained to finalize the quarterly report. Henry was also there, locked in his office with the blinds drawn. At 8 in the evening, when she finally finished, she knocked softly on his door. "Come in," his deep voice replied. He was in his shirt sleeves, his dark tie loosened, the top buttons open, revealing the tanned skin of his neck. A glass of whiskey in his right hand, his eyes slightly red with fatigue. Antonia felt something tremble within her. "The quarterly report, sir," she said, approaching the desk to hand him the folder. As she extended her arm, the file slipped, scattering a few pages. Both bent down at the same time to collect them. Their fingers touched over the paper. Time seemed to suspend. Their gazes met, and for the first time there was no usual professional barrier between them. Just two people, a man and a woman, breathing the same dense air of tension. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarser than normal. The moment broke. Antonia quickly stood up, adjusting her pencil skirt. "Have a good weekend, Mr. Allister," she said, turning to leave. Antonia, the use of her first name made her freeze. "Yes? Have you had dinner?" The question was so unexpected that she almost laughed. "No, sir." He was silent for a few moments, as if fighting an internal battle. "Neither have I. There's a restaurant on the ground floor that stays open late." It wasn't exactly an invitation, but it was implied. Antonia felt her heart accelerating dangerously. "I appreciate it, but I have an engagement," she lied, backing towards the door. Something darkened in his gaze. "Of course. Good night, then." She practically fled the office, trembling. What was happening? What was that electricity between them? Why did the mere thought of dining with him make her panic? She needed to get out, to breathe. On Saturday, while grocery shopping near her small apartment in Clapham's Car, in the East London area, Antonia couldn't stop thinking about the almost invitation, about the way his eyes had darkened when she refused, about the warmth she had felt when accidentally touching him. She was so distracted that she almost collided with a shopping cart. "Sorry, she began, looking up, only to find the last face she expected to see there. Henry Allister, in jeans and a t-shirt, a shopping basket on his arm, looked as surprised as she did. "Mrs. Farrell," he said, his voice devoid of its usual coldness. "Mr. Allister, what a coincidence." An awkward silence settled between them. She noticed his basket contained only a bottle of wine, toothpaste, and frozen food for one person. "Do you live around here?" he asked, sounding genuinely curious. "Yes, a few blocks away," she replied, vaguely gesturing with her head. "Interesting." He seemed to want to say more, but restrained himself. A strange look passed over his face, as if he was seeing something for the first time. "Well, I won't keep you. Have a good weekend." And he walked away, leaving Antonia confused and intrigued. What was he doing in that supermarket, so far from the triplex penthouse he owned in Kensington, one of the city's most exclusive areas? On Monday, the atmosphere in the office was different, more tense, more charged. Henry seemed to actively avoid her, leaving rooms when she entered, delegating tasks via email when he used to pass them personally. Antonia wondered if she had done something wrong, if the strange tension between them had just been her imagination. Until Wednesday, at the end of the workday, he called her into his office. Antonia entered, feeling her stomach churn with anxiety. "Please sit," he said, his face an impenetrable mask. She obeyed, nervously adjusting her skirt. "Ms. Farrell, I've noticed some inadequacies in your professional conduct." The phrase hit her like a slap. "What do you mean, sir?" He didn't look her in the eyes, fixing his gaze on a point over her shoulder. "Your proximity to certain sensitive company data, coupled with certain attitudes I consider inappropriate for the workplace, have led me to make a difficult decision." She felt the blood drain from her face. "Am I being fired?" she asked, her voice almost failing. "I am restructuring the department. Your position will be eliminated. You will receive all legal benefits, of course, and a letter of recommendation." A lie, all a lie. There was no restructuring. He was getting rid of her because of that inexplicable tension, that moment of vulnerability when he almost invited her to dinner, the embarrassing encounter at the supermarket. He was getting rid of what she represented, a flaw in his absolute control. "I understand," she said, her face now a mask as cold as his. "When should I leave?" "Immediately. HR has already prepared your documents." She stood up, her legs trembling with anger and humiliation. "Any specific feedback on my performance that might help me improve in my next job?" she asked, her voice surprisingly firm. For the first time since she entered the room, he looked at her directly. There was something in his eyes. Regret, confusion, desire. Impossible to say. "You are too competent, Miss Farrell. You'll do well anywhere." She nodded dryly. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Alistair," she said, turning to leave. "Antonia," he called, when she was already at the door. She stopped, but didn't turn around. Don't feel," she cut him off. "Business is business, isn't it?" And she left, head held high, crossing the office without shedding a single tear. Only when she reached the car park, inside the old car she had inherited from her father, did she allow herself to collapse. She cried with anger, frustration, humiliation. But mainly, she cried for what could have been and never would be. She promised herself, between sobs, that would be the last day Henry Alistair would have any power over her, the last day she would be seen as fragile or irrelevant. From that Wednesday on, Antonia Farrell would be different. 2 weeks later, Alistair and Sons Construction's annual charity ball took place at the Shard Hotel. It was the most important event on the company's social calendar, where millionaire clients, influential politicians, and celebrities gathered under the pretext of raising funds for social projects in the communities where the construction company operated. Henry, as CEO, would never miss it, even if he detested that kind of event. It was a matter of image, and image, in his world, was everything. He circulated through the ballroom, a glass of whiskey in hand, automatically greeting people whose names he barely remembered. When the buzz around the entrance caught his attention, he turned casually, and then froze. Antonia had just entered, but not the Antonia he knew. This woman wore a red dress that hugged every curve of her body, her curly hair loose in a magnificent halo around her perfectly made-up face. But the most surprising thing was her posture, erect, confident, as if that ballroom belonged to her. And she wasn't alone. Beside her, a tall man, broad-shouldered and with an easy smile, guided her with a hand on her waist. The familiarity of the gesture suggested intimacy. Henry felt something dark and primitive rise in his throat. Anger, jealousy, regret, a toxic cocktail of emotions he wasn't used to processing. He watched, paralyzed, as she greeted former colleagues, laughed casually, drank champagne. How had she gotten an invitation? Who was that man? Unable to restrain himself, he approached the couple when her companion momentarily stepped away to get drinks. "Miss Farrell," he said, his voice hoarser than he intended. She turned to be, and for a fleeting instant, he saw surprise in her eyes, soon replaced by a calculated coldness. "Mr. Alistair, "What a pleasant surprise," she replied, her perfectly polite smile not reaching her eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here." Evidently, her smile widened. "My companion, Michael Coast, is one of the new investors in the Build Tomorrow Foundation. I was invited as his advisor." Michael Coast. The name hit Henry like a punch, the young prodigy of civil construction, owner of a newly acquired fortune and his latest headache in the market. "Interesting career change," he commented, trying to maintain his composure. "Surprising how doors open when others close, isn't it?" Her companion returned, handing her a glass of champagne. "Michael, this is Henry Alistair, my former boss," Antonia introduced, her voice melodious. "Ah, the famous executioner." Michael laughed, extending his hand. "Pleasure to finally meet you in person. Your former assistant talks a lot about you." Henry felt his jaw clench as he shook the other man's hand with unnecessary force. "I hope it's good things." "Oh, she says I learned everything about the market by observing you." Michael's smile was genuinely friendly, apparently oblivious to the tension, including what not to do. Antonia took a sip of champagne to hide a smile. Henry realized he was being played on a board where he didn't know the rules. "If you'll excuse us, Mr. Alistair," she said, placing her hand on Michael's arm. "We promised the mayor a dance." As she passed him, she leaned in briefly and whispered, "Sorry, sir. Today I'm busy being inappropriate outside the professional environment." That destroyed him. Completely. For the first time in his adult life, Henry Alistair felt his pride shatter into 1,000 pieces. That woman, who less than a month ago was just another invisible employee, had transformed into something powerful, magnetic. And worse, she had stirred something within him that he couldn't name. He watched her dancing with Michael, laughing at something the mayor said, circulating through the ballroom as if she had been born into that environment that, in fact, belonged to him. With each passing minute, he felt control, his most precious asset, slipping through his fingers. When he couldn't bear it anymore, he retreated to the hotel terrace, seeking air and solitude. The London night stretched infinitely, an ocean of lights under the thin mist. How could he have been so foolish? How had he let fear lead him to push away the only person who saw him beyond the mask of the ruthless CEO? "Nice view." Her voice caught him by surprise. He turned to find Antonia standing at the terrace door, alone, her arms crossed against the cold. "Where is your companion?" "Networking, doing what he does best," she replied, approaching to observe the city beside him, maintaining a safe distance. "He's just a friend, you know, a good friend who helped me when I needed it." Henry felt an irrational relief at that information, immediately followed by shame for feeling relieved. "Why are you telling me this?" She shrugged, a gesture strangely vulnerable for the confident woman who had entered the ballroom. "Because, despite everything, I'm not cruel. And I saw your look when we came in." Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken words. "I'm sorry," he said finally, the words foreign in his mouth, "about the dismissal. It was cowardice," she completed, without bitterness in her voice. "Yes, it was." He nodded, accepting the truth as he deserved. "I've been thinking about you," he admitted, surprising himself with the confession. "I tried to contact you." "I know. I received your emails, your messages, the contacts through former colleagues. I needed time. And now?" She stared at him, her eyes shining under the faint light of the terrace. "Now nothing, Mr. Alistair. You made your decision when you fired me. I made mine when I decided to move on. Some bridges, once burned dishes, cannot be rebuilt." He felt something ache in his chest, a sharp, physical pain. "Everyone deserves a second chance," he said, his voice low. "Deserving and earning are different things," she replied, turning to leave. "Farewell, Henry." It was the first time she had used his first name, and it sounded like a goodbye. In the days that followed the ball, Henry couldn't get Antonia out of his head. The image of her in that red dress, the new confidence in her gaze, the way she had pronounced his name before leaving, everything tormented him. For the first time in his life, the powerful CEO of Alistair & Sons Construction felt completely lost. At the office, nothing seemed to work properly anymore. The new assistant, recommended by the HR department, was technically competent, but couldn't anticipate his needs as Antonia did. Reports took longer to be finalized, meetings seemed to drag on interminably, and his mood, already naturally acidic, had become unbearable. "You're impossible, brother," Clara, his younger sister, and the company's legal director, said, throwing a folder onto his desk one particularly tense afternoon. "2 secretaries have resigned in a month. What's going on with you?" Henry massaged his temples, feeling the onset of a migraine that seemed to have become his constant companion. "Nothing. Just generalized incompetence," Clara observed him with keen eyes, as blue as his own, a legacy from their Portuguese mother. She pulled up a chair and sat in front of him, crossing her legs elegantly. "It's because of that assistant you fired, isn't it, Antonia?" He stiffened immediately. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Please, Henry, everyone commented on how you looked at her at the ball, how you practically ran to the terrace after she arrived with Michael Coast, and how you came back from there looking like you'd been punched in the stomach." "Absurd," he muttered, but without conviction. Clara sighed, leaning forward. "You know, our father taught us a lot about business, but nothing about life, about feelings." She paused. "You fired her because you were starting to feel something for her, weren't you?" The precision of her observation left him momentarily speechless. Clara had always been the most perceptive of the siblings, the one who could see beyond the masks everyone wore. "She was an employee. It would be inappropriate." Clara laughed without humor. "Since when do you care about what's appropriate? You own the company, for goodness sake." She stood up, adjusting her impeccable suit. "You pushed her away because you were afraid to feel something you couldn't control, just like our father." The words hit Henry like a slap. The comparison to Augustus Alistair, the ruthless patriarch who had built an empire at the cost of destroyed relationships and a dysfunctional family, was the worst possible offense. "I'm not like him," he said through clenched teeth. "No!" Clara raised an eyebrow. "Then prove it. Fix this." When his sister left, Henry stared at the closed door for long minutes. Then, with sudden determination, he picked up the phone. The following week, after using every possible contact, Henry finally found out where Antonia was working. As Michael Coast's executive advisor at Coast Developments, she was involved in a housing project in the East London area of Clapham. Ironically, the same neighborhood where she lived. Without a second thought, he got into his Porsche and drove to the site. The contrast couldn't have been greater. From the luxurious office in Canary Wharf to a construction site on the city's outskirts. He parked his flashy sports car between concrete trucks and dusty pickups, ignoring the curious glances of the workers. In the small improvised office next to the site, he found her bent over architectural plans, discussing animatedly with a man in a yellow hard hat. She wore jeans, a simple shirt, and safety boots, so different from the impeccably suited secretary or the femme fatale in the red dress, but equally magnetic. When she saw him standing at the door, her eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Mr. Alistair." The formality was a barrier she still maintained between them. "Can we talk?" he asked Faust without beating around the bush. She hesitated, looking at the man beside her, who seemed confused by the interruption. "This is Raymond, our chief engineer," she introduced. "Raymond, this is Henry Alistair from Alistair & Sons Construction." The man immediately seemed uncomfortable, as if he were facing an intimidating celebrity. "A pleasure, sir. Your reputation precedes you." "Raymond, could you excuse us?" Antonia asked gently. When they were alone, she crossed her arms, defensive. "How did you find me? I have my resources." "Of course you do," she sighed. "What do you want?" "Henry, more humiliation is not on my schedule today." He took a step forward, noticing how she immediately recoiled. "I came to apologize. Properly, not just for a moment of guilt on a terrace." Antonia studied him, cautious. "You drove 40 minutes through London traffic in that absurd car, all the way to the city's outskirts, just to say, 'I'm sorry'?" "Yes." The simplicity of the answer seemed to disarm her momentarily. "Why?" "Because I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, the words coming out with difficulty. "Because everything's been wrong since you left. Because I was a coward." She looked away, visibly shaken by the unexpected confession. "That changes nothing," she said. finally. You fired me because you started to feel something and it scared you. How do I know you won't do the same again when you feel threatened? People like you, Henry, don't know how to love. They only know how to possess. The words hurt, mainly because they contained truth. How can I prove I'm changing? He asked, sincere. She laughed without humor. Changing? You, the great Henry Alistair, who builds and destroys empires before breakfast? Yes, me, he insisted, taking another step forward. This time, she didn't recoil. Give me a chance. A single chance. Antonia stared at him for a long time, as if searching for something in his eyes. Finally, she sighed. I'm coordinating a volunteer project on Saturday afternoons, Our Lady of Good Deliverance Church, in Clapham. If you really want to prove something, show up there, 9 in the morning, and leave the Porsche at home. With that, she dismissed him, returning to her plans and projects, leaving him with a strange feeling of hope and fear, a combination he had never experienced. The following Saturday, at 8:45 a.m., Henry parked his Toyota Corolla, the most discreet car he could find in a hurry, in front of the small church in the heart of Clapham. He wore jeans and a simple shirt, trying not to attract attention, but still felt out of place, like a foreigner in unknown territory. The church was bustling, with people carrying boxes, setting up tables, organizing hampers. He spotted Antonia in the center of the courtyard, giving instructions to a group of teenagers. She wore denim shorts, a white t-shirt with the church logo and trainers. Her hair was tied up in a colorful scarf. She seemed in her element, radiant. When she saw him, the surprise on her face was genuine. Clearly, she hadn't expected him to actually show up. You came, she said, approaching. Did you doubt it? She smiled, a sincere smile that hit him like a ray of sunshine. Completely. She looked at his empty hands. Didn't you bring anything to donate? He felt his face flush. I didn't know I should. To his surprise, she laughed. It's all right. You can make up for it with work. Do you know how to paint walls? He, who had never even changed a light bulb, felt completely lost. I learned fast. And so the man accustomed to signing million-pound contracts spent the morning painting the walls of a catechism room, alongside teenage volunteers who had no idea who he was. At first, he felt ridiculous, with paint splattering on his always immaculate hands. But gradually, something strange began to happen. He was enjoying it. There was a simplicity in manual labor he had never experienced, a concrete satisfaction in seeing the immediate result of effort. And, most importantly, there was Antonia, occasionally passing by to check on the progress, smiling with approval and, sometimes, laughing at his obvious ineptitude. At noon, everyone gathered for a community lunch, simple bologna sandwiches, soda in plastic cups, homemade cake baked by the ladies of the community. Henry, accustomed to Michelin-starred restaurants and expensive wines, was surprised by how much he appreciated that unpretentious meal. He sat in a corner, watching Antonia interact with everyone. The ease with which she moved among the elderly of the community, the troubled teenagers, the single mothers who came to collect food parcels. She knew everyone by name, knew their stories, their problems. She's incredible, isn't she? The voice beside him startled him. It was an elderly lady, with white hair and a gentle smile, who had sat near him. Yes, she is, he agreed, without realizing the smile that formed on his lips. Antonia has a gift. She sees people for who they really are. That's how she brought many of us to the project, including you, it seems. He looked at her, surprised. How do you know? The lady laughed. Dear, I'm 78. I recognize a man in love from miles away. But be careful. Our Antonia is strong, but she's been hurt a lot. Before he could respond, Antonia approached, looking slightly concerned to see who he was talking to. I see you met Mrs. Zuleika, she said, casting a warning glance at the lady, who merely smiled innocently. We were having a very interesting conversation, the elderly woman replied, getting up with the aid of a cane. Your friend is a good listener, Antonia, a rarity these days. When Mrs. Zuleika moved away, Antonia sat beside him. I hope she didn't scare you. She's the official gossip of the neighborhood. She told me you have a gift for seeing people. Antonia blushed slightly, looking away. Mrs. Zuleika exaggerates. She paused. You did well today, for a CEO who probably never got his hands dirty in his life. I'm discovering there's a lot I've never experienced. Their gazes met, and for a moment, the barrier between them seemed less insurmountable. Why this project? He asked, genuinely curious. She reflected for a moment. I grew up in this neighborhood. My mother cleaned houses to support me and my brothers after my father died. This church helped us a lot. She shrugged. I'm just giving back. And your work with Michael Coast. It's paid, obviously, but it also has purpose. We're building affordable social housing, not luxury condominiums. The comment could have sounded like a criticism of his company, but Henry realized it was just an observation. Did you always want to work with this? She smiled, melancholic. I wanted to be an architect. I even passed the entrance exam for Imperial College London, but I needed to work full-time. I couldn't reconcile them. She looked at him with curiosity. And you, did you always want to follow in your father's footsteps? The question caught him by surprise. No one ever asked him that. Everyone assumed that he, as the firstborn, would naturally take over the Alistair empire. I wanted to be a pilot, he admitted, surprising himself with the confession. But my father considered it a waste of potential. He said I was born to command, not to serve. What a sad view. What do you mean? She looked at him intensely. To command is a form of service, Henry. The best leader is one who places himself at the service of others, not above them. The words hit him with unexpected force. In all his years of expensive MBAs and leadership consulting, he had never heard anything so simple and profound. In the afternoon, when work resumed, Henry offered to help distribute food parcels. He was surprised by the poverty of some families, by the stories of struggle, by the dignity they maintained despite the difficulties. An elderly lady cried upon receiving a parcel, explaining that she hadn't eaten meat in weeks. A man, visibly ashamed, confessed that he had lost his job and couldn't feed his 3 children. When he returned to the church courtyard, Antonia found him sitting on a bench. Thoughtful. Are you all right? She asked, sitting beside him. I had no idea, he said, his voice low. My company has been building in this city for decades. We pay millions in taxes. How are there still people starving just a few miles from Canary Wharf? She didn't answer immediately, giving him space for his reflection. What will you do with that question? She said finally. He looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Now you know. You saw with your own eyes. What will you do with that information? It was a challenge, not an accusation. Henry felt something shift within him, as if a door that had been locked for years had finally opened. At the end of the day, when most of the volunteers had already left, he helped Antonia close up the church. The silence between them was comfortable, different from the tension of their last encounters. Thanks for coming, she said, as they walked to the car park. I didn't think you'd last all day. Neither did I, he admitted, smiling, but I'm glad I stayed. They stopped beside her car, an old Fiat Punto with faded paint. Can I see you again? He asked, feeling strangely vulnerable. She studied him for a moment. I'll be here next Saturday, she replied, not exactly a yes, but definitely not a no. Me too, he promised. In the following Saturdays, Henry became a constant presence at the project. Gradually, he got to know the residents, learning their stories and their needs. Mrs. Zuleika became a kind of surrogate grandmother, always with a piece of advice or a playful jab on the tip of her tongue. The teenagers, initially suspicious of the playboy, eventually accepted him when he offered to give financial math lessons and help them with university entrance exams. In parallel, he began to implement changes at Alistair & Sons Construction. He initiated a priority hiring program for local residents for projects in the area. He created a fund for scholarships in engineering and architecture for low-income youth. He partnered with NGOs for affordable housing projects. Clara, observing the changes, commented ironically, "Who would have thought the executioner had a heart? This Antonia worked a miracle." But the real miracle happened in the moments between him and Antonia. Gradually, formality gave way to familiarity. They exchanged messages during the week, sharing daily events. After the volunteer work, they started having lunch together in small neighborhood restaurants. He discovered she loved pistachio ice cream, had a passion for science fiction books, and dreamed of visiting Japan. She, in turn, discovered that behind the ruthless CEO was a man who hadn't slept well since adolescence, who secretly liked anime, and who played the guitar when no one was looking. On a rainy Saturday, when work at the church finished early, he invited her for coffee. They ended up in a small family bakery, watching the rain fall while sharing childhood stories. "I don't think I've ever seen you laugh like that," she commented, when he finished telling about a prank he had played with his sister. "I don't think I've had much reason to laugh in a long time." The comment came out more intensely than he intended. Their gazes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Antonia looked away first, gazing at her coffee cup with sudden interest. "Henry, what are we doing?" she asked softly. "What do you mean?" These Saturdays, these conversations." She looked up at him. "Where is this going?" He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. "Wherever you want it to stop or continue." She bit her lip, a gesture he already knew as a sign of nervousness. "I'm scared," she admitted. "You are who you are. I am who I am. Different worlds." "Not as different as we thought, are they?" She smiled, a sad smile. "Maybe, but there are still things between us. Your world, your family. What matters is what we feel," he interrupted, covering her hand with his on the table. "And I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you, Antonia." The moment was interrupted by her phone ringing. Checking the screen, she frowned, worried. "I need to take this, sorry." She moved away a little, speaking in a low voice. Henry couldn't hear the conversation, but noticed how her expression became tense, worried. When she returned, she seemed disturbed. "Is something wrong? It was my mother. My younger brother has a high fever. I need to go." "Of course, I can take you." "No, thank you. I'll get an Uber." "Antonia, it's raining. Please, let me help." She hesitated, but eventually accepted. In the car, she was quiet, visibly worried. Henry respected her silence, driving carefully through the flooded streets of Clapham. Antonia's family home was a simple, faded yellow building on a narrow street. She turned to thank him and say goodbye quickly, but he insisted on accompanying her to the door. Antonia's mother, a middle-aged woman with her daughter's same smile, opened the door, looking relieved to see her. "He's in his room," she said, before noticing Henry standing behind her daughter. "Oh, sorry, I didn't see you had company. Mum, this is Henry. A friend." Henry extended his hand, feeling strangely nervous, like a teenager meeting his girlfriend's family. "Pleasure, Missy Mary Farrell," the woman replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Thank you for bringing my daughter in this weather." Before he could respond, a groan came from inside the house. "That's Peter," Mary said, worried. "His fever isn't going down." "Did you give him the medicine the doctor prescribed?" Antonia asked, entering the house. Henry stood at the door, unsure whether to enter or leave. He felt like an intruder in an intimate family moment, but before he could decide, Mary called him in. "Come in, please. It's raining heavily." Reluctantly, he entered the small living room, simply decorated, but extremely clean and organized. Family photographs covered an entire wall, Antonia at various ages, always with the same radiant smile, accompanied by 2 boys and her parents. While Antonia and her mother attended to her brother in the bedroom, Henry watched the photos. In one of them, a tall, thin man with a gentle smile hugged a young Antonia. It must have been her father, whom she had mentioned had passed away. "He was a bus driver," Mary's voice startled him. "An accident on the M25. Antonia was 15. Henry felt a knot in his throat. "I'm so sorry." The woman nodded, accepting the condolences. "She had to grow up fast. She helped take care of her brothers while I worked in 2-3 houses a day, studied at night." She looked at him with curiosity. "How did you meet my daughter?" "She worked at my company," he replied, without going into detail. Mary observed him with that keen gaze that seemed to be a family trait. "I see." She paused. "My Antonia is special. She has a bigger heart than common sense, sometimes." Her gaze suddenly became protective. "I wouldn't want to see her hurt." Before he could respond, Antonia returned to the living room. "The fever has started to subside," she informed, looking relieved. "I think he'll be fine." She noticed the closeness between her mother and Henry, and something in her gaze suggested concern about what they might have discussed. "I think I should go," he said, feeling it was time to give her space. "I'll walk you to your car," Antonia offered. Under the small porch, protected from the continuing rain, she suddenly seemed shy, sorry for the inconvenience. "It wasn't inconvenient at all." He hesitated. "Your mother seems incredible." "She is," Antonia smiled. "She raised 3 children alone, working as a cleaner. I never saw her complain or give up." "Now I understand where your strength comes from." The comment made her blush slightly. "Thank you for today, for the coffee, for the ride. Can I call you tomorrow to see how your brother is?" She nodded, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the rain creating a curtain around them, as if they were in their own world. Henry approached slowly, giving her time to recoil if she wished. She didn't recoil. When their lips touched, it was as if something finally found its place in the universe. A soft, almost shy kiss, so different from what one might expect between a dominant CEO and his former assistant. A kiss of discovery, of mutual vulnerability. As they pulled apart, both seemed equally surprised by the intensity of the moment. Antonia touched her lips with her fingertips, as if trying to preserve the sensation. "Good night, Henry," she whispered, before quickly entering the house. He stood in the rain for a few moments, feeling his heart beat as never before. Something inside him had definitely changed, as if a lifetime of control and emotional isolation had been swept away in a single kiss. The next morning, he sent a flower arrangement to her house, quaint with a simple card. "To the woman who taught me to truly see, H." He didn't expect an immediate reply, knowing she would be busy with her brother. But in the afternoon, he received a message. "He's better. Thank you for the flowers." They were beautiful. An exchange of messages followed, lasting all day. Shy at first, becoming more personal as the hours passed. At night, he finally gathered the courage to call. They talked for hours, like teenagers, about everything and nothing. He, lying in his luxurious Kensington penthouse, she, probably curled up in the simple bed of her childhood home. "It feels wrong," she said at one point. "What? This? Us? It's like we're in a crazy fairy tale, the powerful CEO and the fired assistant." He laughed. "If it's a fairy tale, I hope it has a happy ending." "Do you believe in happy endings, Henry Alistair?" The question had more depth than it seemed. "I never did," he replied honestly. "Until I met you." The silence that followed was loaded with meaning. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice low. "Of what?" "Of believing in this, in us, and then discovering it was just a moment of madness for you, a phase, a curiosity about how the others live." The insecurity in her voice made him want to reach through the phone and hug her. "Antonia, look out the window. Do you see the moon?" "Yes," she replied, seeming confused by the change of subject. "I'm looking at the same moon. From here, on the other side of the city. Different worlds, same sky." He paused. "I don't know what will happen tomorrow, or a month from now, or a year, but I know I've never felt this before, and I know I want to find out where this will lead us. Together." Her reply came in an emotional whisper. "I want that too." In the following weeks, between messages, calls, and meetings whenever possible, something blossomed between them. It wasn't just desire or passion, though there was plenty of both. It was a deeper connection, based on mutual vulnerability and the acceptance of who they truly were, beyond social masks. Henry began inviting Antonia to places he never imagined frequenting before: a family pizzeria in Borough Market, a book fair on Portobello Road Market, a pub with a samba band in Camden Town. He wanted to show her that he could be different, that he could adapt to her world, not just bring her into his own. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through Hyde Park after an impromptu picnic, she asked, "Why me, Henry, among so many sophisticated, wealthy women from your circle? Why were you interested in me?" He stopped walking, turning to face her under the soft light of the park lamps. "Because you were the first person in a long time who truly saw me. Not the CEO, not the heir, not the executioner, just Henry." He touched her face tenderly. "And because, with you, I can be who I truly am." She smiled, her eyes shining with contained tears. "And who are you really?" "Henry Alistair." "I'm still discovering," he replied sincerely, "but I know I want to make that discovery with you by my side." The kiss they exchanged was different from the previous ones, more intense, more laden with promises. When they pulled apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm in love with you, Antonia Farrell. Completely, irremediably in love." Her eyes widened slightly, as if, despite all they had shared in recent weeks, she hadn't expected to hear those words. "I'm in love with you too," she whispered, as if fearing that saying it aloud might break the spell. "And that scares me more than anything." He held her face in his hands, as if she were the most precious object in the world. "I won't hurt you, never again, I promise." That night, under the London stars, they sealed a silent commitment. There was still much to discover, many obstacles to overcome, different worlds to reconcile. But for the first time, both believed that perhaps, just perhaps, fairy tales could happen in real life, even the most improbable ones. The first months of their relationship were like a dream. Antonia and Henry built their own universe, made of messages exchanged during the day, calls that lasted until dawn, meetings in the most unexpected places in the city. He took her to exclusive restaurants where she was treated like royalty, but discovered she preferred the simple pubs where live samba played and people ate with their hands. She introduced him to a world where money wasn't the measure of all things, where genuine human connections were worth more than million-pound contracts. However, as in every modern fairy tale, reality soon began to impose itself. The first test came when Henry invited her to dinner at the Alistair mansion, the house where he had grown up and where his mother, Eliza, still lived with a staff of servants. "I'm scared," Antonia confessed, as she got ready in the small bathroom of her apartment, looking at the navy blue dress she had bought especially for the occasion, simple yet elegant. "What if your mother hates me?" Henry, sitting on her bed, smiled tenderly. "Impossible to hate you. Besides, my mother isn't as terrible as she seems, just a little traditional." Traditional was an understatement, and they both knew it. Eliza Alistair, widow of the powerful Augustus, was known in London's elite circles as a woman of strong opinions and unshakable standards. Portuguese by birth, she maintained the accent and conservative values of her upbringing. The mansion in Richmond was exactly as Antonia had imagined, imposing, surrounded by high walls and an immaculate garden, the kind of place that made her modest Fiat Punto look like a broken toy. Henry had insisted on picking her up, but she made a point of going in her own car. "If I'm going into this world, I'm going on my own terms," she had said, as she handed the keys to the valet, who barely hid an expression of surprise at seeing the old car. Antonia felt her stomach sink. Henry, noticing her apprehension, held her hand firmly. "You look beautiful," he whispered in her ear, "and they'll love you as much as I do." His words calmed her momentarily, but the anxiety returned as soon as they entered the mansion's hall E, with its marble floor and chandelier that must have cost more than her entire apartment. Clara, Henry's sister, was the first to greet them. To Antonia's relief, she proved surprisingly warm. "Finally meeting the woman who tamed the beast," she joked, embracing her with genuine affection. "My brother can't stop talking about you." Antonia returned the smile, beginning to relax. Perhaps the evening wouldn't be as terrible as she had imagined. Then Eliza Alistair appeared, tall, elegant, with the same piercing blue eyes as her son, but without any warmth in them. "Mother, this is Antonia," Henry introduced, a slight tremor in his voice revealing that, despite everything, he still sought his mother's approval. Eliza extended her hand, a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "A pleasure, dear. Henry has spoken about you." Her Portuguese accent seemed to emphasize each syllable, turning the polite phrase into something almost threatening. Dinner proceeded in polite tension. Conversations about the weather, about the company, about future projects. Antonia answered questions politely, but felt Eliza's scrutinizing gaze with every word, every gesture, as if she were constantly being judged and invariably found wanting. "And your family?" "Antonia," Eliza finally asked after dessert was served. "Henry mentioned your father passed away. I'm so sorry. What did he do?" "My father was a bus driver, madam," she replied simply, refusing to feel shame. He died in an accident on the M25 when I was 15. Oh, Eliza seemed momentarily speechless. And your mother? She's a cleaner. She works very hard to support my two younger brothers. A heavy silence fell over the table. Clara cast a warning glance at her mother, which was solemnly ignored. I see, Eliza finally said. And where did you study, dear? I went to public secondary school. I passed the entrance exam for architecture at Imperial College London, but I couldn't attend. I needed to work full-time. Another silence. Henry squeezed her hand under the table, a gesture of silent support. Fascinating, Eliza commented, with a smile that didn't hide her disdain. You and Henry really come from different worlds. Yes, but we've found we have more in common than appearances suggest, Antonia replied, holding the matriarch's gaze. After coffee, when Henry stepped away to take an urgent call, Eliza found Antonia alone on the veranda, observing the illuminated garden. You seem like an intelligent young woman, the older woman said, without preamble. So I'll be direct. My son is going through a phase, some kind of late rebellion, perhaps an early midlife crisis. Antonia felt her blood run cold. With all due respect, madam, I don't believe it's a phase. Eliza laughed, a humorless sound. Dear, I know my son. Henry grew up destined for a certain kind of life, a certain kind of partner. She paused significantly. He may be enchanted now by your simplicity, your authenticity, but Henry is an Alistair. Eventually, the novelty will wear off, and he will seek someone who can truly share his world. The words were like daggers, precise and cruel. Antonia felt her eyes sting, but maintained her composure. You don't know your son as well as you think, she said softly. And you certainly don't know me. Oh, I know your type, Eliza replied with false sweetness. A pretty girl, from humble origins, seeing a chance to climb socially. I don't blame you, but if you truly care about Henry, you must realize that you have no future. Antonia was about to respond when Henry returned, looking concerned. Is everything all right here? He asked, noticing the tension between the two. Perfectly fine, Eliza replied, her social smile back on her face. We were just getting to know each other better. In the car, driving home, Antonia remained silent. Henry, sensing her distress, pulled over at a viewpoint overlooking the city. What did my mother say to you? Antonia hesitated. Part of her wanted to protect him from his mother's cruelty. Another part knew that honesty was essential between them. She thinks I'm an opportunist, she finally replied, and that you're just going through a phase. His expression hardened. I'll talk to her. This is unacceptable. No, Antonia touched his face gently. It's not worth it. Your mother is just trying to protect you, in her own way. Protect me from what? From the best thing that's happened in my life. The comment warmed her inside, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. What if Eliza was right? What if she and Henry were just a temporary fantasy, destined to shatter against the rock of reality? The days that followed were marked by a subtle change, not in Henry's behavior, which had become even more attentive, as if trying to compensate for his mother's coldness. The change was in Antonia, who began to observe with critical eyes the differences between their worlds. She noticed the glances of the maître d' when they arrived together at fine restaurants. She perceived the polite but condescending smiles of his childhood friends. She felt out of place in conversations about trips to destinations she could barely pronounce, about investments in amounts she would never see in her bank account. Henry, in turn, continued to divide his time between the corporate world and volunteer work at the church project. He had started a foundation to fund scholarships for low-income youth, inspired by her story. He was, truly, trying to build a bridge between their worlds, but bridges are fragile, especially when powerful forces conspire to bring them down. On a Wednesday afternoon, Antonia received an unexpected call at Coast Development's office. Ms. Farrell? The female voice on the other end sounded vaguely familiar. This is Clara Alistair. Can we meet? It's urgent. They met at a discreet cafe in Shoreditch, away from curious eyes. Clara seemed nervous, something unusual for the always confident lawyer. Sorry for the dramatic approach, she said, after ordering an espresso. but I needed to talk to you without Henry knowing. Antonia felt a tightness in her chest. Has something happened to him? Not yet, but it will. Clara took a folder from her bag. Our mother is planning something. Something to separate you two. She slid the folder across the table. Inside, Antonia found copies of emails, internal company documents, and something that made her blood run cold. A detailed report on her life, compiled by a private investigator. She hired someone to investigate you, Clara explained, her voice low. She's looking for anything she can use against you, and now she thinks she's found it. The last document in the folder was a merger proposal between Alistair & Sons Construction and the country's largest competitor, Mason Engineering. I don't understand. What does a merger have to do with me? Clara sighed. The deal includes an unofficial clause. The owner of Mason's son, Gregory B., has been interested in Henry for years. Our mother is using this, a marriage between families that would seal the largest real estate empire in Latin America. Antonia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Does Henry know about this? Not yet. She'll present the agreement as purely business at first. Only later will she reveal the personal part. I know my mother. She'll play on his sense of responsibility, on the family legacy. Why are you telling me this? Clara looked at her intensely. Because I've never seen my brother as happy as he's been in the past few months, and because I'm tired of seeing our mother manipulating our lives like pieces on a chessboard. Antonia returned home that night with her head spinning. She thought about calling Henry, telling him everything, letting him decide. But what if Clara was wrong? What if it caused an irreparable rift between him and his mother? Or worse, what if, confronted with the choice between her and the family empire, he chose what he had always known? She spent a sleepless night. The next morning, with deep, dark circles under her eyes and a heavy heart, she made a decision. She sent a short message. We need to talk tonight. My apartment. The day at work was a blur. Michael, noticing her state, tried to question her, but she brushed him off. How could she explain that she was considering breaking up with the man she loved to save him from an impossible choice? When Henry arrived, around 8, he brought flowers and a smile that quickly disappeared when he saw her expression. What's wrong? He asked, leaving the flowers on the table and approaching with concern. Antonia took a deep breath. I think we need to take a break. The words fell like a bomb in the small apartment. Henry stood motionless, as if he hadn't understood. What do you mean, take a break? We're deluding ourselves, Henry, she continued, avoiding looking him in the eyes, pretending we can make this work. But the truth is our worlds are incompatible. He approached, trying to take her hands, into which she promptly hid in her pockets. What are you talking about? We're fine. We're happy. We're living in a bubble. Her voice trembled. A fantasy that will burst as soon as we face reality. Is this because of dinner with my mother? He seemed genuinely confused. I spoke to her. I made it clear that it's not just your mother, Antonia interrupted. It's everything. Your world, your money, your responsibilities. You are the heir to an empire, Henry. I am the daughter of a bus driver and a cleaner. So what? Frustration began to show in his voice. That doesn't matter to me. But it should. She finally looked at him, her eyes tearful. Your company employs thousands of people. It has responsibilities that go beyond your personal desires. Henry took a step back, comprehension beginning to dawn on his face. You spoke to Clara. It wasn't a question. She told me about the merger, Antonia admitted, about how it could secure the company's future, expand the business, protect jobs, and about Gregory Mason, I presume. His voice was dangerously calm. She nodded, unable to speak. So that's it. You're breaking up with me for the sake of the company. He laughed without humor. This is ridiculous, Antonia. I don't give a damn about that merger. You should, she almost screamed, tears now flowing freely. It's your legacy, your responsibility. My responsibility is to my happiness, to our happiness. It's easy to say that when you've never had to choose between happiness and survival. The words came out harsher than she intended. A heavy silence fell between them. Henry looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Do you really think that I'm some kind of irresponsible playboy who can afford to ignore consequences? No. She shook her head. I think you're a good man who deserves someone who can share your world without complications. Someone who doesn't make you choose. He took another step back, hurt evident on his face. I thought you knew me better than that. He turned to leave, but stopped at the door. You're not protecting me from a difficult choice, Antonia. You're making the choice for me. And that's worse than any manipulation from my mother. When the door closed, Antonia collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Had she done the right thing? Or had she just made the worst mistake of her life? The days that followed were a nightmare. Unanswered messages, ignored calls. Henry seemed to have disappeared off the map. She even abandoned the volunteer project at the church, unable to face the questioning glances of Mrs. Zuleika and the others. It was Michael who found her crying in the filing room a week after the separation. You don't have to tell me what happened, he said, sitting beside her. But whatever it is, it's not worth your tears. I made a terrible mistake, she whispered, her voice hoarse. I ruined everything. Then fix it, he replied, simply. You're the most determined person I know, Antonia. If anyone can fix something broken, it's you. The words stayed with her. That night, she decided she needed to at least try. She sent a message. Can we talk? Please. The reply came hours later, short and formal. I'm traveling. I'll be back in 2 weeks. Traveling? Where to? With whom? The questions consumed her, but she had no right to demand answers. She had given up that right when she decided to end everything. The 2 weeks felt like an eternity. Antonia immersed herself in work, helping Michael finalize the housing project that meant so much to her. On weekends, she returned to the church project, facing Mrs. Zuleika's unspoken questions with a sad smile. He'll be back, the elderly woman said one afternoon, as they folded clothes for donation. Men like that don't give up easily. I'm not so sure, Antonia replied, trying to hide her pain. I did something unforgivable, Mrs. Zuleika laughed, the sound surprisingly jovial for someone her age. My dear, nothing is unforgivable when love is true. And believe an old woman who has seen many things, what you two have is true. The night before Henry's supposed return, Antonia couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned in bed, imagining 1,000 different scenarios for their reunion, all ending in rejection. When she finally fell asleep, it was almost morning. She was awakened by the insistent sound of the doorbell. She looked at the clock, 7:30 a.m. Who could it be at that hour? She got up, dazed, pulled her robe over her cotton pajamas, and went to the door, not caring about her appearance. When she opened it, she froze. Henry was there, looking as exhausted as she was, with deep dark circles under his eyes and unshaven. But his eyes shone with fierce determination. You're wrong, he said without preamble. What? You're wrong about us, about me, about everything. Before she could respond, he walked past her, entering the apartment like a force of nature. In these past 15 days, I visited every branch of the company. I spoke with managers, laborers, cleaners. I met their families, heard their stories. He paced back and forth, words pouring out like a torrent. I restructured the benefits program, initiated partnerships with local universities for scholarships, started plans for subsidized housing for employees. He stopped, turning to face her. And do you know what I discovered? That I can do all of this, I can be the CEO the company needs, without giving up the person I love. Antonia felt her heart race. The merger, it's not happening. He smiled, an exhausted but triumphant smile. I secured independent investors. The company will expand, create more jobs, without having to submit to Mason's demands. He approached, taking her hands in his. You were right about one thing. I have responsibilities. But you were wrong to think I need to sacrifice my happiness to fulfill them. I can have both, Antonia. I can have the company and you, if you still want me. Tears streamed freely down her face. Your mother, my mother will have to accept it, or not. But that's my problem, not yours. He brought their faces closer. The only question that matters now is, do you still love me? Yes, she whispered, her voice choked. I never stopped loving you. The kiss that followed was different from all the previous ones. It tasted of tears, of regret, of forgiveness, but mainly it tasted of a new beginning, When they parted, he looked at her intensely. No more secrets between us, no more doubts. He took a deep breath. I want you, Antonia, every day, every night, for the rest of my life. She hugged him tightly, as if afraid he might disappear. I want you too, but I'm scared. Our worlds met for a reason. He smiled, wiping her tears with his thumb. To create something new, something better. That morning, they made love for the first time. It wasn't like in romantic movies, with soft music and rose petals. It was real, sometimes clumsy, with nervous laughter and whispered confessions. It was discovery, vulnerability, surrender. I've never been with anyone, she confessed, as they lay together, wrapped only in the sheets and the golden sunlight streaming through the window. He looked at her with surprise, followed by infinite tenderness. Are you serious? Yes, she blushed. I was always so focused on working, studying, taking care of my family. I never found anyone who was worth it until you. He kissed her softly. Then let me make it worth it. Every moment. The following months were about rebuilding, about honored commitments, about broken barriers. Henry officially introduced Antonia as his girlfriend at corporate events, ignoring surprised glances. Antonia included him in Sunday lunches at her mother's house, where he learned to play dominoes with her younger brother and appreciate Mary Farrell's homemade feijoada. Eliza Alistair continued to resist, but Clara had become a fervent ally, often serving as a mediator between her brother and their mother. She'll give in eventually, she assured, at a lunch between the three of them. She's already curious. She asked if that young woman was still working at Coast Developments. Not for long, Henry revealed, smiling mysteriously. I have other plans. The other plans were revealed one Saturday afternoon, after a particularly productive day at the church project. As they tidied up the last donations, Henry made an unexpected proposal. What do you think about going back to studying? Antonia looked at him, confused. What do you mean? Architecture. At Imperial College London. You said you were accepted but couldn't attend. She laughed, shaking her head. Henry, that was 10 years ago. I'd have to take the entrance exam again, and even then, how would I balance it with work? What if you didn't have to work full-time? The proposal caught her by surprise. Are you suggesting I live off you? Her voice had a slight hint of irritation. No, he smiled. I'm suggesting a partnership. He then explained his plan, a consulting firm specializing in affordable social housing projects, combining his technical knowledge with her social vision. She could work part-time while attending university. She would be a partner, not a dependent. The idea was so perfect, so her, that Antonia was momentarily speechless. You would do that for me? No, Antonia. He held her hands. I would do this for us. 2 weeks later, Henry took her to dinner at the Shard Hotel restaurant, where they had reconnected on that fateful night of the charity ball. But instead of the main ballroom, they were led to the terrace, where a solitary table awaited them, surrounded by candles and flowers. What is all this? She asked, enchanted by the setting. A new beginning, he replied, pulling out her chair for her. Dinner was magical. They talked about the future, about shared dreams, about the new company they were about to create together. But when dessert arrived, Henry seemed strangely nervous. Is everything all right? She asked, concerned. Better than ever. He took a deep breath. I'm just gathering my courage. Courage for what? In response, he stood up and, to Antonia's astonishment, knelt before her. From his pocket, he took out a small blue velvet box. Antonia Farrell, he began, his voice trembling with emotion. You came into my life as an employee and transformed into the reason for my smile. You tore down my walls, challenged my certainties, and showed me that true power lies not in control, but in the ability to love and be loved. He opened the box, revealing a delicate sapphire ring surrounded by small diamonds. I didn't choose a diamond solitaire because you are not like all the others. I chose a sapphire because, like you, it is unique, authentic, and radiant even under pressure. He paused, his eyes shining with contained tears. Antonia Farrell, Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The world seemed to stop. The lights of London, spread out below them like a blanket of stars, silently witnessed that moment. "Yes," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. 1,000 times, yes. When he slid the ring onto her finger, she felt as if all the pieces of her life had finally fallen into place. Two different worlds, united by a love stronger than prejudice, more durable than traditions, truer than any fairy tale. The wedding took place 6 months later at Our Lady of Good Deliverance Church, where everything had truly begun. It wasn't an extravagant ceremony, as might be expected from the Alistair heir, nor too modest to be out of place with the social position they now shared. It was, like everything in their relationship, a perfect balance. The church was decorated with elegant simplicity, white flowers and candles creating a warm and solemn atmosphere. The guest list included executives and politicians, as well as community residents, project volunteers, and Antonia's family. To everyone's surprise, Eliza Alistair attended. She didn't smile openly, but neither did she show her initial hostility. Clara served as maid of honor, radiant in her blue dress, while Michael, who had become a close friend of the couple, accompanied Henry as best man. When the church doors opened and Antonia entered, escorted by her older brother's arm, since her father couldn't be there, a collective gasp went through the assembly. Her dress, designed by a stylist friend of Clara's, was the perfect symbol of her journey. Elegant without being ostentatious, sophisticated without losing its simplicity. But the most impressive thing was her face. It radiated such genuine, pure happiness that even the most cynical present felt touched. Henry waited for her at the altar, his eyes fixed on her as if no one else existed in the world. When he saw her approach, he couldn't hold back his tears. This man, who had once been known as the executioner for his coldness in business, now openly wept with emotion. Their vows were written by themselves. Henry promised to be not only a husband, but a partner, a confidant, a friend. He promised never to allow power, money, or status to come between them. He promised to wake up each day striving to be worthy of the miracle that was their love. Antonia promised to be strength in moments of weakness, calm in storms, light in darkness. She promised never to let insecurities or fears prevent her from loving fully. She promised to choose him every day, regardless of the obstacles life placed in their path. When the priest declared them husband and wife, and Henry kissed her with tenderness and passion, the church erupted in applause. It wasn't just two people uniting, it was two worlds merging, creating something new and beautiful. At the reception, held in an elegant outdoor space near the church, guests mingled in a genuine celebration. Executives in suits chatted animatedly with neighborhood residents. Antonia's mother, radiant in her turquoise dress, received congratulations like a true lady of society. And to everyone's surprise, Eliza Alistair approached the couple during the party. "My son," she said, with that Portuguese accent she had never lost. "You are happy." It wasn't a question, but a statement. "As I've never been, mother," Henry replied, embracing Antonia around the waist. Eliza turned to her daughter-in-law, studying her with eyes that, for the first time, didn't seem to judge. "You proved me wrong, Antonia." A small, almost imperceptible smile appeared on her lips. And not many people can say that. It was the closest to a blessing they could expect, and both accepted it with gratitude. As night fell and the stars appeared in the London sky, Henry led Antonia to the dance floor. To the sound of a soft song, they danced as if they were alone in the world, lost in each other's gaze. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," she replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you?" "More than I ever imagined possible." Around them, guests watched with emotional smiles. Mrs. Zuleika, seated at a nearby table, had tears in her eyes. "See," she commented to Clara, who had sat beside her, "I told you it was true." The lawyer smiled, watching her brother and sister-in-law dance with so much love. "I never doubted it. I just feared the world would tear them apart." "Ah, my dear," the elderly woman replied, with the wisdom of someone who had seen many love stories blossom and wither. "True love is not destroyed by the world. It transforms the world. And that was exactly what Henry and Antonia were doing, in their own way, transforming the world around them, building bridges between different realities, proving that love, when genuine, knows no barriers of social class, traditions, or expectations. As the night progressed and the celebration continued, they allowed themselves to glimpse the future that awaited them, a life together full of challenges, certainly, but also of infinite possibilities. A new apartment, large enough for the family they dreamed of building, the consulting firm that would unify their passions and talents, the architecture course that Antonia would finally complete, but above all, a love that had survived prejudice, pride, fear, and emerged stronger, more resilient, truer. When the party finally came to an end and they left for their honeymoon, a trip along the British coast, combining the luxury he knew with the simplicity she loved, they carried with them not only the rings on their fingers, but the certainty that they had found something rare and precious. A story that began among papers, bitter coffee, and contained glances had transformed into a journey of self-discovery, growth, and true love. The cold CEO learned to open his heart. The invisible assistant found her voice and her worth, and together they proved that happy endings don't just exist in fairy tales, but can be built day after day by people who have the courage to tear down walls, the strength to face prejudices, and the faith to believe that love, when true, always finds a way. In a city of contrasts like London, where wealth and poverty coexist separated by high walls and ingrained prejudices, Henry and Antonia became a symbol that differences can unite rather than divide, that seemingly incompatible worlds can meet and create something new, something better. A lesson that, they hoped, would inspire others to follow their example, building bridges where once there were only chasms,